Welcome to Gallery Teachers Masterclass. I'm Steve Hirschhorn, and my workshop is called Decluttering English Language Teaching. And decluttering means going through usually one's house and one's garage, looking for things which shouldn't be there, or they're things that we've bought erroneously and never been much good. Perhaps we've received things as a gift, although that won't apply in our case here. But we have been offered things. We've been offered deals over the years as English language teachers, and many teachers have collected these things and stored them and perhaps tried to use them without really knowing what is behind them. And so what I want to try to do today is to look at some of those things, at least look at all the secondary issues that have built up around the use of some of these techniques and practices. And I want to question whether they're actually doing any good, because ultimately, over the last 30 or 40 years, nothing much has changed in terms of the speed of acquisition. I challenge anyone to disagree with that. I don't think that learners today are learning any faster than they did in the 80s, and perhaps we can even go back before that. So something is not quite right. Something's going wrong, because we have 100 years of SLA research, and then we have 30, 40 years of adopting new ideas, adopting add-ons and extras. And somehow the two notions don't seem to join together. We don't seem to be getting any better at what we're doing. And so what I want to do is to strip away some of the stuff which is stopping us from achieving what we really should be achieving. That's what this workshop is going to be about, and I hope you'll find it interesting. After 40 years of teaching and training teachers, I've finally come to one or two conclusions, and this workshop will deal with one of them. What it's going to deal with is the amount of clutter we've managed to accumulate in this house of ours. To stay with this analogy, every room you go into, imagine, has another piece of unnecessary equipment. A rowing machine we used twice, a fitness gadget which promised the earth and delivered nothing, a cooking aid which wastes more time than it saves, a shelf of self-help books which only help the author make some money. So I'm going to put a spotlight on some of these and try to show why they are a distraction for language teachers. So let's get down to it. If you ask teachers how they teach and what they use in terms of approach, method, and technique, keeping in mind that approach is like one's philosophy of education, one's professional belief system, governing the way that you work, governing the method, including a number of techniques used in your classroom, you get a variety of nice sounding replies. Here are some of them. I'm an eclectic teacher. I use whatever suits. I use my own method and it really works. I don't believe in method. I use the communicative approach. I use music, and so on. These responses are all genuine. They come from real teachers and reflect a differing approach to the job we all do. And that's quite as it should be, isn't it? We don't want teachers all teaching in exactly the same way. But being eclectic means you must know a lot about other ways to teach in order to be able to access their essence when needed. Using your own method means you come up with something uniquely your own, which is fine, as long as it's properly tested and assessed. Not believing in method is just naive. The method is how you work, and presumably teachers who say this actually do something in the classroom. Perhaps what they mean is a combination of the two previous answers. Now, the communicative approach, fine, but what is it? Ask 10 teachers separately and you'll get 10 different answers. And that has to be a problem. It's been a problem over the years. Music? Great. Me too. You might see instruments behind me. But what else do you do? My point really is that even at a very basic level, when we start to examine what teachers use, what they do, we already have problems of identification. And much as I hate the word, standardization. But in my view, the real problems begin to emerge when one digs a little deeper. And that's what I want to focus on today. I want to focus on what we'll call the extras, as it were. Many teachers say they use, for example, critical thinking, but are unable to explain how beyond the very basic ideas. Teacher told me not so long ago that her students had become better equipped just to choose a handbag when out shopping. Well, that's fine, but not, I think, demonstrating the depth and intricacies of critical thinking. CT has been promoted by such as OUP and promoted well. So well, in fact, that it appears to be simply a matter of doing the exercises in, for example, the Q series. I recently asked language teachers in 2 social media groups if they used CT, and many, I think actually the majority, said they did. One very experienced teacher commented that CT was an essential part of education. And I agree. If kids were trained to be critical thinkers from primary age, we might well have many fewer problems than we currently face in the world. Climate change, racism, gender equality, acceptance of others might not be in the news at all, because people are able to think more clearly, more objectively, more profoundly. But I'm interesting myself in language education, not general education. And so I ask, what essential role has CT got in language learning? Well, it has none. Not only does it have no role at all, but teachers are not trained to use it, not trained to teach it or to promote it, and neither are they paid to offer CT. If my child was attending a language class, I would be horrified to discover that an unqualified teacher had been using such a technique with my child without permission. Now, Paul and Elder wrote a miniature guide to critical thinking, concepts and tools. It's a miniature guide, but in just 22 pages, it is a miniature. It lays out some of the extraordinary complexities of CT. For example, the 6 stages of thinking from unreflective thinker through to accomplished thinker. You know about that stuff? What about the 8 elements of thought? You know about that? And the 3 levels of thought. And the 8 universal intellectual standards, and much more. Now, I respectfully suggest that most teachers with whom I have had contact on this and who profess to applying CT are simply not aware of the complexity of the topic. CT is a highly developed skill which requires specific training and a specific reason for its inclusion in a syllabus. It's not something you simply decide to do by following some exercises in a language course book. Look, CT is great, but nothing to do with language teaching classrooms unless to help the teacher to make more informed decisions. Just today, I saw an article for teachers which listed 60, that is 60, techniques to foster CT in the classroom. So how much do teachers need to study CT in order to use it properly? Or are they wasting their time? Now, what I'm saying here applies to others of these add-ons, as we shall see. Some of these visions are extremely seductive. Take multiple intelligences, for example. Now, MI states that we employ diverse kinds of intelligences to perform various tasks, and having a superior intelligence in one area can enable learners and people in general to accomplish more in that endeavor. This is attractive to those who feel that we should all be considered intelligent and that we shouldn't differentiate between clever and not so clever people. It is, in a sense, an egalitarian view of the world. So little Johnny, who can't add up to save his life, as indeed I can't, is rewarded for being able to kick a ball, which I also can't. And Sally, who can't swim but sinks, literally, is okay because she's really good at the piano. Thus, we level out the world and feel comfortable. According to the theory, or perhaps I should call it a hypothesis. There are intelligences which apply to the following areas. They're logical, mathematical. There's musical. There's bodily, kinesthetic. There's spatial. There's interpersonal. There's intrapersonal. There's moral. There's naturalist intelligence. There's spiritual. There's existential, and so on. Now, accepting this means we should try to ensure that our learners have the chance to respond using whatever intelligence they excel in to succeed. That means we have to set different tasks to respond to different intelligences, right? But this seems like an attractive notion in a sense, doesn't it? But you know, there's almost no supporting evidence in second language acquisition research, that's SLA, or anywhere else. In fact, the list which I've posted may not even be current, given that Gardner, who's in a sense the inventor of multiple intelligences, has himself several times changed his mind. But the point is, as far as I'm concerned, that those items are not intelligences at all. In fact, I think that they're, if you like, talents, traits, or perhaps abilities. Some people are good at building a wall. Others are musical. And some are crap at maths. But this shouldn't really be used as a basis for a theory of intelligence. It's nonsense. And it shouldn't be used to waste teachers' valuable time either. Now, I'm useless at soldering, but quite good at making things from wood. So should we have a soldering intelligence and a carpentry intelligence? I'm also a reasonable musician, but I don't read music and I'm rubbish at maths. Supposedly something which is connected to music. Now what? What do we do with that? And what about people who learn to do something in later life and become excellent at that skill or ability? Have they developed a specific intelligence? Is that possible? I don't know. Anyway, let's move on to another extremely seductive and adhesive idea. That is learning styles. Now, I've written learning styles stroke NLP. I'll tell you why in a second. Learning styles proposes that we have innate preferences or channels for the way we learn stuff. Now, these are largely based in neuro-linguistic programming, and that's NLP. Though this connection is rarely acknowledged. NLP was created by Richard Bandler and John Grinder in the 70s, after many hours of observation of successful therapists who were engaged with behavioral change. That is, therapists, not teachers. NLP advises that we have visual, audio, kinesthetic, and little cited anymore, olfactory and gustatory channels. I think these are pretty much self-explanatory, but just in case, the system suggests that some people learn things more easily by seeing, some by hearing, that's audio, some by moving or engaging in a tactile way with the subject matter, and then to complete the picture through smell, that's olfactory, and taste, that's gustatory. Consider these statements. I think we can see how this would work. This probably rings a bell with many of us. If we can get a handle on this, it'll be useful. Now, these three statements embody the idea of learning styles, each supposedly responding to a different channel. But where is the evidence that any of this is true? There's no empirical evidence that learning styles in any way accelerates learning. And as William Fury points out, cognitive science and neuroscience view learning styles as a neuromyth. Slavin has written, there is no practical utility in knowing students' learning styles, even if there are such things. And yet, despite so much evidence to the contrary, or rather lack of supporting evidence, learning styles continues to be promoted amongst teachers as a thing. I know, I used to promote it back in the day. Teachers who recently answered my questionnaire mostly said they used learning styles, but very few said they used NLP. I asked one who did respond in the affirmative to the NLP question how they used it in class, but that teacher didn't respond. So I'm bound to feel that sometimes answers to these questionnaires are a little, what should we say, a little random. Do you use learning style? Do you know what NLP is? Now, there's a book. It's called Master Teaching Techniques. And it outlines a large number of NLP-based techniques to improve this or that ability in one's students. The exercises are extraordinary in their eccentricity. But here's the thing. Some of them, when stripped of their NLP gobbledygook, are perfectly good exercises. Here's an example. Ask students to spell a new word on the ceiling in their mind's eye and then color in the letters. They're more likely to recall that word later than simply having written it in a notebook. Wouldn't you agree? Perhaps this is because they've made an investment in their own learning. Perhaps what Gategno used to call an Ogden, an investment of intellectual energy. Some of the advice to teachers in this book is, in my view, 100% valid under the typically NLP heading, change states. So ignoring the peculiar NLP content and digging into the actual activities and the advice, one can indeed find gems. But learning styles is not real. Applying it as part of one's approach doesn't do anything for students, but might make a teacher feel more responsive. Trouble is, many people, teachers or not, believe they are, for example, visual learners. Why do they think that? Probably because they were taught by teachers who will use lots of visual aids. Probably because they seem to recall things they've seen better than things experienced through other senses. All valid stuff, but in no way does this support the idea that learning styles exists. There was a Russian called Shereshevsky who naturally employed various sensory creations as mnemonic devices to aid his already prodigious memory. He recalled names, places, and things using flavor, sound, and texture. And this reference, along with the already mentioned mnemonic exercises in master teaching techniques, suggests that we might well pay attention to employing such techniques rather than assuming that our students learn using specific learning channels or styles. Now, we come to the next idea, which should have changed the way we worked and promised increased student success rates. That idea is flipped classrooms. In case you've managed to avoid hearing about this, let's quickly reiterate. The idea is simply that students do pre-class work at home and thus, when in the classroom context, are better prepared and can undertake more useful and in-depth work. A conference in Tehran in 2018 contained an enthusiastic support of flipped classrooms, but the research conducted was with a vanishingly small sample of 20 students and 2 teachers. So suggesting remarkable implications for language teachers might be stretching a point. I think here, perhaps more than others of the add-ons I'm examining, one might say that if you're a fan, then it may well work for you, as was the case for the late Jim Baker, who, while not a language teacher, made flipped classrooms work for his chemistry lessons, perhaps largely through his own enthusiasm and spirit. But there is little or no evidence of consistently faster, higher results in language learning. Rather like MOOCs, they promised much and delivered very little. Bear in mind, too, that most of the research and trials into flipped classrooms does not focus on language learning, but on other subjects. And as we know very well indeed, learning a language is not like learning anything else at all. A 2018 survey found that fewer than 16% of European universities found the model useful. And an MIT study found no increase in student motivation or performance at all. Right. So what are you? Let's move along and ask you. Are you a teacher or a coach? Or are you something else? Now, I've tried very hard to get an accurate and satisfactory, for me, statement of differentiation between teacher and coach, and have failed completely. The qualities both of person and approach suggested for a coach could be, and they're equally applicable to teachers. The idea that coaches allegedly listen more, plan content with students, are somehow more professional, work more closely with students than a teacher is not only quite wrong, but quite insulting to those of us who've been doing that for years without feeling the need to adopt a special title. Look, I've got no problem with deciding whether someone deciding they want to call themselves a coach or an elephant or abandoning the title of teacher. No problem at all. But then please don't make out that what you do as a coach is somehow superior to what good teachers do every day. I worked in a largely bottom-up way with learners for more than 35 years. I've consulted learners to find out what they want, how they want it delivered, and what they need. I've also spent many hours advising that learners' expectations be better reined in a little. You know, those people who start at A1 and say they want to be C2 within the next 3 weeks. Okay, good luck. I've tailored courses to students' needs, and I've responded to their progress personally. And of course, I'm certainly not alone. That's what teachers who care do. As an aside, there was a very similar discussion in the 1980s, but the new term used in those days was trainer, as in, I'm a language trainer, not a teacher. Hey, there's nothing new under the sun. So this proposition is another layer of complexity to which one is supposed to aspire. Of course, to join the hallowed ranks of coaches, you'll have to pay to do a course. I haven't done that, so I can't comment reliably on what such a course might contain. But I can guess that it'll be little more than or similar to what a good teacher development course would offer. Resist. Focus instead on growing as a teacher, since becoming a coach is just another distraction. My next target is so-called mindfulness. Again, trying to find the definition with 2 feet on the ground and not floating off into the middle distance surrounded by butterflies is tricky. I understand that it's supposed to reduce stress through meditation and being in the moment. It's something to do with being aware of self and surroundings, isn't it? I mean, in my youth, I recall being told to be mindful of consequences of my actions. In other words, be aware, and also beware. Well, I don't have a problem with this idea. It's not for me, but if you like it, go for it in your private life, not in a language classroom. I'm not into yoga, Pilates, veganism, healing with stones. You can be. I don't care at all. But if you bring this into the classroom, then I do have questions. And the first one of who knows how many will be, how does this increase student success rates in the subject you are teaching? I won't bore you with the other 999 questions. As with critical thinking, I'm not paying a teacher who may or may not have a degree in psychology or a diploma in therapeutic technique to teach my kids or myself procedures which have nothing to do with language learning, nothing whatsoever. If you tell me it helps by reducing stress, which of course hinders learning, I will suggest you find other ways to help your students lower their affective filters. Humor, voice tone, achievable challenges. There are there's hundreds of ways that you can reduce stress on students. I also don't want to be told to meditate or breathe in a particular way, unless that's the service I've asked for and paid for. Look, I know that practitioners of mindfulness mean well. Their hearts are surely in the right place, and I respect that. But equally, there should be respect for the fact that foisting your own ideas of how we should be on others is simply not acceptable. Unless all concerned have signed up for that program, and most of all, where's the research-based evidence supporting the use of mindfulness in the language learning environment? Keep it at home. Now, let's have a look, a brief glimpse, and not even an overview, a glimpse through a keyhole at what is proposed as a new idea. This is brain-friendly learning, or neuroscience in language learning. The gist of it is that if you know how the brain works, learning will be enhanced because the teacher can respond in a brain-friendly way. Okay. Now, I don't want to be controversial, or perhaps I do, but I'll say I don't. But brain-friendly teaching has been around forever. I was teaching trainee teachers about various parts of the brain and how they interact to ease the learning burden in the 80s and 90s. I love this. I used the triune theory as a model. And while that's no longer current, it was a good place to start. And many years later, my ex-student teachers still occasionally quote parts of that to me as having been useful. Largely, I think, because I, with all modesty, made it amusing rather than made it into something, some sort of quasi-scientific study. Anyway, my objections to this are several. First of all, it's definitely not new. There's a shocking lack of historical awareness in our profession. Most teachers are not trained neuroscientists. If you are, good luck. So far, applying brain-friendly methods has not succeeded in accelerating learning as far as I know. Now, brain-based learning may be a good idea, but only if teachers are properly trained, and I don't mean a weekend course. If learners are properly informed about what's going on and understand the implication, and also if they're given indications on how proven techniques of self-study can be applied. In other words, can they take this home and use it in some way? Now, in researching for this particular workshop, I see a new addition to the brain-friendly techniques. It builds layer upon layer. This one is called flexible cognition. And unsurprisingly, it suggests an ability when a different approach, it suggests an ability to judge when a different approach is needed and change accordingly is a good thing. I'm sure it is. And I'm sure that having a teacher who's qualified in that area, who's charged with training students in that area, could bring results. And this might even be applied to language learning. Are you qualified to teach flexible cognition? And should such a course be applied to the language teaching course, applied during the language teaching course or before it, so that students are ready to apply it as they start the language course? Well, if some students aren't very good at it, what happens then? Oh, I've got so many questions. Perhaps we need some regulation in our industry beyond CELTA and Cert TESOL and the equivalent diplomas. At the moment, all I can see are money-making schemes which attract teachers who, as we said at the beginning, are desperate for a new pathway to success. They say a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And in a specific field, that could not be more true. To teach brain-friendly techniques to assist students to learn more easily, faster, and more successfully, teachers must be properly qualified in that field of science. Somebody said a long time ago, can't remember who it was, a surgeon only cuts one person at a time. Teachers can cut many people at the same time. So there we are. I've looked at critical thinking, learning styles, and NLP. Don't forget that link. Multiple intelligences, flipped classrooms, coaching versus teaching, mindfulness, and brain-friendly approaches, all in the context of language learning. But you know, I have no inherent objection to any of these. What I object to is that teachers are sold the latest fad, as if it were the answer to all their considerable problems. And there's the rub. If they applied critical thinking to this whole area, they wouldn't be taken in at all. Catch-22, isn't it, really? So why do these things appear? And why are they grabbed with both hands by so many teachers? I think it was Spolsky who noted way back that language teachers need to stop their search for the elusive pot of gold. So this has been going on for a very long time. This is not new at all. This search for something which is going to answer one's problems. And these ideas are just the latest iteration of that frantic search. Look, language teaching is difficult. It often doesn't work as we would like because language learning is also difficult for most of us poor mortals. Yes, there are those who can learn a language in 11 weeks. Or there are those who speak 97 languages and so on. But most of us can't do that. Remember pillow learning or sleep learning? No, of course not. It never worked and died a death. Though I did see an ad a couple of years ago for something horrifyingly similar. Social media is full of ads for language learning apps which promise the world. Do they deliver what they promise? Learners and teachers are desperate to reduce the time and effort involved with this most difficult of endeavors, that of learning a foreign language. So ideas pop up and they sound great, seductive. Conferences are run, people make money and teachers live in hope. But mostly, I'm afraid, it doesn't fly. But then, despite the numerous articles and papers sinking the great ships of multiple intelligence and language styles, for example, teachers seem to cling on to the raft regardless. Ship sunk, but they're clinging onto the raft. It's sometimes difficult to admit that one's been meandering down the wrong path. It's exactly what happened to me. I was heavily into neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, and loved the idea of learning styles and multiple intelligences, but I now know that I was mistaken. And thus I wasted a lot of time, which I could have used better for the proper benefit of my students and myself. So what to do? Look for second language acquisition related research. It's not the end of the world. It hasn't got all the answers, but it's a start. Remember, if it promises the earth, it certainly won't deliver the earth. And then learn about and apply critical thinking to all of these ideas. Now, having said all of that, let me also be clear that a little of this and that can break the monotony. Give learners a chance to do something different. So while I know that multiple intelligences and learning styles have no scientific basis, I really have no objection to teachers applying those ideas now and again. And creating tasks which might appeal to a visual learner or someone with spatial intelligence is fine. It's even great, but that's as far as I can go. All things in moderation. The problems arise when teachers put all their money on the latest idea, the latest fad, and then convince themselves that it works. I've met lots of those teachers, and when you examine their results, they're the same as everyone else's, or if not, then certainly not better. So the solution, since there's not much use presenting a problem without offering some kind of resolution, is really simple. It involves returning to what we actually know about how language learning takes place. You know, I originally wanted to call this session back to basics, but decided that it sounded rather staid and boring. But I do invite you to look at what we know for sure, and that also means looking at what we don't know. I don't think people in the 21st century are learning any faster using a series which has critical thinking exercises or the latest ubiquitous general English course book than they did in the 1970s with English in Situations or Kernel 1. Coble tried to shake things up a little using a lexical approach based on corpus work, but didn't meet with huge success, unfortunately. We have more bells and whistles now. We've got color photos, more authentic listening tasks sometimes, more awareness of creative activities and communication and the importance of communication, more information about how to memorize lexes and so on. But considering that we have more than 100 years of actual research into second language acquisition, the changes are cosmetic and have little overall effect on the speed and efficiency of learning. So my message is this: resist the latest gadgets and focus on available evidence of what has a reasonable chance of working. Abandon the full-on assumption of ideas which have literally nothing to do with language learning. That available evidence, by the way, doesn't have to appear from the dusty corridors of academia. It can arrive from action research run by teachers for teachers. And to be honest, I really wish there was more of this happening. Action research is tomorrow. In the 2013 10-volume, nearly 7,000-page Encyclopedia of Applied Linguistics, arguably a pinnacle of collective research for our profession, none of the above topics which I've looked at today have been given any significant mention at all. Finally, all of the above might change tomorrow or in the next few years. New and reliable SLA research may show that some kind of flipped classroom or some brain-based technique can hugely accelerate acquisition. And so I recommend keeping an open mind, a mind that is amenable to evidence-based ideas. That's it. It's so simple. So look, if you want to get into some more of this stuff and look for English language teaching resources and so on, please do. Gallery Teachers workshops, the CPD, continuous professional development stuff, you'll find on galleryteachers.com /ELT workshops. I think you've got the link there in front of you. So that would be great to get involved with all of us, and we'll see all of you there. Well, you could be forgiven for thinking that I want to go backwards. But when forwards means simply adding to our burden with little or no measurable advantage, then I suppose continuing to go forwards in the same way must be considered a waste of time and energy. That's a waste of our time and energy. Not to mention that we have discarded things like used tissues with little or no regard for their potential use. I mean, amongst the cast-offs, we can find jewels, such as task-based learning. And of course, it's true that some teachers are still using TBL, but by and large, it's not really present in the mainstream, and perhaps it should be. The lexical approach, too, offers much to learners, but who's using it these days? I mean, there are people using it, but could we describe that as mainstream? I don't really think so. Well, what they should always have focused on, their learners' needs. You don't do that by buying into the latest fad in the hope that it'll solve your problems. Change top down to bottom up, as far as you can, given the constraints of syllabus. I know that some people work in institutions where that's very difficult, but I've been there too, I know what that's like. But there are things that you can do. And find out what makes your learners tick in terms of language acquisition. Spend more time actually asking learners what they like to do, what they think they need to do. Guide them. You are the expert. Just because the learner says she needs more grammar doesn't necessarily mean that's true. They may actually need less, since a previous teacher has confused them by giving too many unnecessary explanations. So analyze what your learners need by observing them and interacting them, and react to them.